My name is Dominic Beggan. I teach in political science at Montgomery over in the Woodlands. I've got two PowerPoints. First PowerPoint, I'm going to introduce a little bit about Ireland, the history, in order to understand the Troubles. I know you understand it perhaps now because you've read the book. Hopefully you have a good understanding. That book actually is a good introduction to the basic violence that lasted for 30 years. So I'll give you a quick review of how we got there, how we got to the Troubles in this history, and then the next PowerPoint, it'll just be a little bit about how I got here and then what it was like growing up in Belfast. Okay? So Síl Fáilte means what? When you first meet somebody, what do you say? Hello, welcome. Síl Fáilte is a Gaelic word for welcome. It means 100,000 welcomes. In Ireland, about 30% of the population speak Gaelic all the time. Everybody speaks English, but generally speaking, you'll only get people speaking Gaelic if you go to the edges of the country on the west coast. People in Belfast or Dublin will speak Gaelic, but the vast majority of people will speak English all the time. So there's no language barrier when you get there, but there are two official languages, English and Gaelic. So this is your quick reading and Gaelic. Okay, so we're going to study a little bit about why the political violence happened. And here, these are a couple of crossover themes that I want you to think about. Discrimination, civil rights, national identity. You know, what makes you American, what makes you Texan, what makes you Irish, what makes you British. You'll see that here. Democratic failures. The violence was caused by the failures of the system, the democratic system, not to accommodate the needs of the minority. And the last one is terrorism. And we're quite used to terrorism, especially after 9/11. But in Northern Ireland, when I was growing up, terrorism was a day-to-day occurrence. You know, it became very focused for us after 9/11, and everything changed. But in Northern Ireland, ever since I was born, there was constant violence, and I was used to that. So these are kind of themes that I want you to think about as we talk. So I broke it into 4 parts. First part is early history of Ireland. Then second part, why the British invaded. Third part is the last 100 years, modern Irish history. And then the last part is basically what you read in the book, is why we had the Troubles. Okay? The Troubles is just the name we give to the political violence. And it lasted for 30 years. Today, started in 69, ended in 99. Today there's no political violence. You wouldn't notice anything if you were there. You would think this is so strange that, you know, after reading about this in the books, it doesn't look like this. But you'll see when we get into the other PowerPoint about that. Okay, this is the British Isles. British Isles is made up of Ireland, the island of Ireland, and Great Britain. Great Britain made up of 3 countries, Scotland, England, this portion is Wales. Okay, so when you hear the United Kingdom stands for 4 kingdoms that make up the UK. The 4 kingdoms today are the Kingdom of Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England. If you really wanted a total point of view, you'd have to have a Protestant telling this as well. Because a Catholic says that they're Irish. Okay? I grew up in Northern Ireland. I believe myself to be Irish. Well, I'm American now, Irish American. I'm an American citizen. But a Catholic in Northern Ireland would say that they're Irish. A Protestant would say that they're British. And that's an interesting distinction. You'd think it'd be so simple. We're both Irish, we're both born in the same island. But you'll see why that's important later on. I'm from the capital of Northern Ireland, so this is Northern Ireland. I'm from the capital, Belfast. Very small place. We call the rest of Ireland just Ireland or Eire. Eire is the Gaelic word for it, E-I-R-E. And the capital is Dublin. You know, a lot of the big bands come out of Dublin, U2. It's only about 170 miles across and about 260 miles long. You could fit the whole island into Texas about 7 or 8 times and still have space left over. Very, very small everything's bigger in Texas, obviously. But this goes to show you how really big we are when you compare it to a European country. So I'll go back and forth to this map just to get you acquainted with the country. So I'll tell you a little bit about the early history, and some of you know this and some of you don't. So I speak Gaelic and English, and the people are called Celts. We take that word and you see it in Boston, it's the Boston Celtics. In Ireland it would be the Boston Celtics. Okay, so the Celts were the northernmost tribes of Europe, and they got pushed to the fringes of Europe, and those fringes became the Celtic nations, or the Gaelic nations. And so people in Scotland can speak Gaelic, Wales, a part of Cornwall, Ireland, and there's actually a small slither of Brittany that is Gaelic as well. And so I can understand what they're saying, but it's kind of like a person from Louisiana speaking Cajun French going to Paris. They can communicate, and they can understand, but they don't understand all the words. Okay, so those things are, those four, and even today I speak I learned very little Gaelic growing up because I grew up in Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland it was prevented, so I know certain number of words, but even today I don't even speak it because nobody to speak to here, and I learned very little growing up anyway. Ireland was a pagan country up until 436. We worshipped many gods, and that's actually part of the folklore. I mean, when you think of Ireland, what are the jokes? What do you think about? Leprechauns. Yeah. Banshees, ghosts. They're actually things that came out of the pagan upbringing, and they got blended with Catholicism or Christianity, and that's why we still talk about them today. That's how you got the Irish to accept them. Well, the whole idea that we became Christians, that the Irish became Christians, is centered around St. Patrick, and he came to Ireland not by his own choice in 436, and it was actually a lot to do with slavery and human sacrifice. He was Welsh. If I go back to the map again, he was from a little town here in Wales. He came from a quite affluent family. He was a Christian, and marauding tribes from Ireland regularly used to attack. You stole the women and the children, and whatever else you could, and you brought them back to Ireland, and you made them slaves. Slavery was quite common, but back in those days, just like the Indians, you were later assimilated into the tribe. You're not a slave for the rest of your life. So he was brought up to actually about 20 miles from where I grew up, a small town. He was a sheep herder, worked for a farm there, and obviously, he's hating it. He's only 12 at the time. He's a Christian. Everybody else is a pagan. All of Ireland are pagans. So he's just trying every possible thing he can to get back to his homeland in Wales. And eventually he does escape, and he gets back to Wales, and he keeps having a recurring dream about going back to Ireland and converting into Catholicism. Of course, the last thing that St. Patrick wants to do is go back to those heathens. So he tells his priest, and his priest sends him on a mission to talk to the Pope. And the Pope says, well, whether you want to or not, that's what God has ordained for you. You're going to convert the Irish. And within 10 years, he did go back to Ireland. Within 10 years, Ireland turns into a Christian country. And it's more Christian than the other countries. And they start the monastic area, where they're building monasteries all over. And the monasteries where we kept a lot of the information and a lot of the Gospels. You've heard of the Book of Kells, perhaps. It's a painted illustration of the Gospels. So when the Black Ages are hitting the rest of Europe, Ireland is growing tremendously because of the monasteries and the education that's going on. And then they create this great white wave. And it's a white wave of people who are going to spread the world and talk about Christ. And this is the idea of Irish priests, tended to be Catholic priests, spreading around and spreading the world. And even today, don't you think it's quite amazing that you can go to Texas or any state, you're like, I don't know about you, but if you're a Catholic, you're liable to bump into a Catholic priest or a Catholic nun. Today, they're not feeding the world as much because they need them themselves. The last kind of invasion came from the Vikings, and the Vikings ended up giving me this kind of complexion. Freckles, red hair, blonde hair. A typical Irish Colleen, the word for an Irish girl, looked like you. Dark hair. That's what the typical part. That's what the typical woman looked like before the invasion of the Vikings. Now we have red, blonde, black, and there's a big mixture. So religion becomes a major factor, and the whole country is basically a Catholic Christian country. Okay. Then the second kind of phase in history goes from the 12th century to the 19th century, and this is the British invasion. And some of the most noted people in here are Cromwell, who led a lot of those invasions and tried to kill as many Catholics as possible. Cromwell has a terrible name in Irish history. But even the word plantation, you associate plantation with what? Slavery. And it's a southern word. This is actually a Northern Irish word. It means to plant Protestant stock. And so the solution that the British are going to come up with is that we're going to have to change the religion in Ireland if we want to prevent attack. And it was actually all about global politics. If you go back to this map, in the 12th and 13th century, the King of England wanted to get a divorce. What's his name? Henry VIII. Okay, and he can't get a divorce because he's a what? Catholic. Okay, so how do you solve the problem of getting a divorce?
Make a new church.
You make a new church, and you call that church the King of Church of England, the Anglican Church. Who's going to be the head of the Church of England? Henry VIII. So overnight, Henry VIII becomes the head of the Church of England, and he's fabulously wealthy because churches back in those days were monasteries. Monasteries had a lot of land. And if Henry VIII is a Protestant, who else is a Protestant? Everybody. If the king becomes a Protestant, all the loyal subjects become Protestants. So remember, you've got this very Catholic country here. Then overnight, this, from Scotland the whole way down to Wales to England, turns Protestant. Okay? So historically, England has always been fighting two Catholic countries below it. What are those countries? France and Spain. Okay? The last thing you want, if you're England, is the Spanish Armada sailing over here, coming in through Ireland and attacking you, because this is a Catholic country. So you need to do something about Ireland for your protection. Take it over. It's got a lot of resources. It's got a lot of wood. It's good, fertile land. In fact, some of you might have been to London before. Most of Parliament was built with the lumber that came out of Northern Ireland, the big beams. So that's why we get these constant invasions from the 12th century to the 19th century, because it's rich and fertile, but more you want to plant Protestant stock, Protestants, so you convert these people who are not willing, they're very hard-headed, they don't want to give up their Catholic religion, and they don't want to give up their language. Well, the British solution was, don't let them practice their language, so try and get rid of Gaelic, and convert them to Protestantism. And that's why today and over history, the vast amount of Protestants were coming in from Scotland, and they settled down through here. Okay, the majority of them being up in Northern Ireland, and that's why it's going to be a problem in our history down the road. Okay, so that's why the British invaded, and it's just, you know, that's what your job is when you want to protect yourself. You take over the next country, and you do whatever it takes to make yourself the dominant nation. Remember, back then, Britain controlled probably, you know, half the world, or at least a quarter of the world at one time. So this is the last 100 years. In the last 100 years, we get this desire in Ireland for home rule. Home rule is the notion that we should rule ourselves. So self-determination. And so there was a series of uprisings and revolts, and the British always put them down pretty quickly because most of the time they were unorganized and they weren't very well armed. I mean, one of the reasons that we won the American Revolution in the States was that we were armed and we knew how to use guns, because you had to know how to use a gun in the colonies if you wanted to stay alive and you didn't want the Indians to scalp you. Well, that was a major problem for the British. You know, for the first time, the British faced somebody who was going to fight back and who was good at fighting back and well armed. Fundamental difference. Most other nations that the British took over, you took the arms away from them and you put them in the garrison. It's very easy to take control of the Indians in India or the Kenyans if they're not armed, when you're armed to the teeth and they have spears or whatever they're going to use. So there was a series of uprisings, and probably the most important was the 1916 uprising in Dublin. And historically this is an important date because what was England involved in? World War I. Okay, so the reason this is important because they're going to see the people who are fighting. The people in Ireland decided, you know, this would be a good time to fight for independence. You know, Britain's busy defending itself against Germany. We can get our independence while they're busy, occupied, and shouldn't be a problem. Well, Britain didn't take that too nicely because they saw that as a treason, major threat. So typically what would happen in a rising, the rising was put down pretty fast. It went on for a week. And actually, if you go to Dublin, it happened in O'Connell Street in the post office, and the holes are still there in the wall. They didn't take them. They left them there as a witness to history. Typically what would happen is the leaders are arrested, they're put on trial, and then they're sentenced to 5 or 10 years, and 3 or 4 years down the line they're released, you know, once hostilities had quieted down. But because Britain was at war, they wanted to make an example of them, so they killed them all. So when you kill the leaders, what do they turn into overnight? Martyrs. Martyrs. And so this inflames the rest of Ireland with a greater desire. See, the Rising wasn't very well supported, that's why it failed as well. But now you've got the average person in Ireland saying we want to get rid of the British. And then we enter into a war of independence, 1919, 1921. And the solution to the war, I mean, the British were going to win if they had kept going the path, because obviously they had more resources. Okay? But the solution, they didn't want to have to stay in Ireland. So this is the solution. They took the island and they created 2 countries out of it. And this country is going to be Eire, or Ireland, green, white and gold, that flag, the tricolour. Interesting colours. Green for the Fenians, the Catholics, white for the peace, and orange for the Protestants. So even the flag denotes, you know, the relationship between Protestants and Catholics. And then remember, most of the Protestants lived up in Northern Ireland. So the British said, look, they want to remain British, so we're going to keep that part of Northern Ireland and it's going to remain part of Britain. That would have been fine except for one problem. 1/3 of the population that lives in Northern Ireland were Catholic and 2/3 were Protestant. So they created a system that lasted for 100 years where it was a Protestant government for Protestant people. So the Catholics, who made up 1/3 of the population, were denied all the rights that you think of: housing, education, discrimination in all kinds of levels. If the police force were 100% Protestant, so anytime there was a dispute, you know, obviously Protestants going to prevail. So there was blatant discrimination. The rest of Ireland didn't, they set up their own government. They didn't have that problem because this is 95% Catholic and 5% Protestant. And the Protestants weren't discriminated against, which was a unique way of looking at it. But so that's how we get to the problem of Northern Ireland. So for 100 years, Northern Ireland is going to be controlled by the Protestants who live in Northern Ireland with direct rule from Britain. So this leads us to the Troubles. And the Troubles began in the 1960s, late 1960s. What was going on in the United States at the time? What else? Civil rights marches. And Catholics started saying, you know what, if those African Americans can get freedom, we can start marching and get, you know, freedom, get jobs, get housing. So Catholics started marching. They were actually, Martin Luther King was very, very well liked in the Catholic community because of this idea that if they can do that, he's an example to us. So Catholics started marching. Obviously, this is not going to go down too well because they're marching for civil rights. And if you remember the civil rights marches, a lot of times the marchers were attacked by dogs and the police. Well, the same thing was happening to Catholics. So the violence started to escalate, and the Northern Irish government couldn't handle it, so they brought in the British soldiers. And you know, when you send in soldiers to deal with a civil dispute, they can't handle things the way police can. They're very heavily handed. So their solution was, we're going to intern people who we think are suspected leaders of this revolt, the IRA. Remember, Catholics they're not believing in the system, so they're forming paramilitary groups, the IRA. Protestants do the same thing. Okay, and so the best solution was to lock up people who we think are the leaders of this. But the problem is, internment came out on the 9th of August, 1971. I was there when it happened. And basically, the soldiers kicked in your front door. They took everybody out of bed, happened in the middle of the night, took everybody out of bed, and then they asked all your names, and anybody over the age of 18, they suspected as being a member of the IRA, they arrested him. No due process. You're arrested and you're put into a detention centre. And you could be kept for a week, 6 months or 2 years. Didn't have to have any reason. Just we think you're a suspected member of the IRA. Well, the problem with that is the IRA knew it was coming. So what do you think they did? No. If you know that they're going to be raiding houses in the middle of the night, what are you going to do? You're going to get out. So most of the people who were probably in the IRA were gone. They probably just went into Southern Ireland the night before. So a lot of people who were arrested, my uncle was arrested, and 4 people in my street were arrested that night. They had nothing to do with the IRA. So what does that do to the Catholic community? And then you start, if you weren't in the IRA, you were now. So they have another march on January 30th, 1972, and it's another civil rights march, and it's protesting the use of internment. And you saw, I normally bring it in there, but Sunday Bloody Sunday by U2, that's what the song is actually about. It's about the shootings that occurred that day. You know, sometimes we listen to music, but don't actually listen to the words of the music. You listen to the rhythm. That is about a civil rights march that was protesting the use of internment. The British Army were watching the march, and they opened up, and 13 people were killed. Again, if the system's not working, the democratic system's not working, you turn towards extremism. You join the IRA. And then the IRA are on one side, and then the Protestants are going to form their extreme groups, the UVF, UDA. And basically, these two groups are going to go at each other for the next 30 years and bomb and shoot each other as much as possible. Eventually, in 1999, we had a peace agreement, and that had a lot to do with Bill Clinton. When America gets involved, things can happen. And most people didn't want to get involved because, and I'm talking about administrations, American administrations, because the problem hadn't been solved for 30 years. But it kind of was interesting. 3 kind of different people came together at one time. We had a new president, which is Bill Clinton. We had a new prime minister in England, and then we had a new Taoiseach. That's the Irish name for the prime minister. These 3 people all got along with each other. And it was the coming together of those groups, different governments, that helped create what we call a power-sharing government. And today, that's how they make decisions in Northern Ireland. The Catholics and the Protestants share power, and all the major decisions are made by both groups. It's kind of funny because the government is made up of extremes. The idea that you create a power sharing government is we wanted to try and eliminate the extremists. But Sinn Féin, who makes up the government, is the Catholic extreme, and loyalist extremes are in there too. So the members who used to control the IRA are now members of government, which is quite amazing, to say the least. And the same with loyalists are in there too. Okay, so I'll tell you about the Troubles now, and then we'll talk about the book. I was born in 1963. I left when I was 15, so I left in 1980. Okay, today I'm an American citizen, and like I said, I teach political science. And I don't think, had I not followed this path, I wouldn't have got here. I wouldn't have been a professor. I always wanted to become a professor. I don't think I would have been able to do it. You didn't have those kind of opportunities available in Ireland. It just wasn't like that. People don't just quit their job and go back to graduate school when they're 30. You know, you do that here regularly, 30, 40, whatever age. In Ireland, you know, you got a job and you kept it because there wasn't a lot of jobs. You know, this country is still the land of opportunities. You can do anything you want here. And I still firmly believe in that, the American dream. So I don't think I could have achieved this. Now, there's a price to be paid for that. And the price is that you leave your home behind. And, you know, I have a lot of brothers and sisters. So, you know, you gain success in one direction, but you lose your family connections in another direction. And you find out later on in life how important that is, or I did. So I moved from Belfast to Lake Charles, Louisiana. There was a family there that let me stay with them. I came on a project called the Ulster Project, where they brought Catholics and Protestants, and the family I stayed with said that I could come back and stay with them as long as I was willing to get a job and help support myself, which I did. I was 15 at the time, and I started cutting lawns, and that's how I supported myself. I give them money. And then when I turned 18, I went to university at McNeese State University in Lake Charles. I became a high school teacher. I always wanted to be a professor, but I wanted to learn how to teach. I find that a lot of professors are very good at their subject matter, but in graduate school they don't actually teach you how to teach. You're miraculously supposed to find that out yourself in the classroom. So I became a teacher first so I could learn how to manage a classroom. And then I saved enough money up to go back to graduate school. I started at LSU, and then I finished my PhD at the University of New Orleans. Okay, so tell you a little bit about my family members. Just about everybody in my family has been either chased or the house was bombed once. My uncles and aunts were beaten up in the neighbourhood. The local pub was levelled, and my uncle was in it the night it happened. A lot of people died. And I'll pass this around. This is National Geographic. I actually came by this by accident one day. I was reading in the library. You know, what kind of nerd reads National Geographic? I guess that would be me. This is when I was 16, 17. I was in high school. And I got to the centre of it, and I saw a picture of my family. And I couldn't believe it. And the coffin, you can just pass that around. I have the same picture in the PowerPoint. The person in the coffin was my best friend. He was my cousin. He was same age as me. So I came here in 1980. He died in 1981, the year of the hunger strikes. And this is what he died for. He painted this slogan. It stands for Provisional IRA. The police came while he was doing it, told him to stop. He didn't stop. They shot him in the back. And back in those days, it was a formality. It was a mistake. They thought the paintbrush was a gun. And there was no commissions to look into things. That's just the way things happened. Here's the funeral. These are all my family members. Those are my uncles carrying the coffin. My father's in the back, and all my brothers are in the line here. They're coming out of my street. I live in this street right here. This is kind of... In Ireland, you've heard of the Irish wake. Well, we keep the coffin in the house. We don't In America, we have funeral parlors. That's kind of alien to the Irish belief. If you have a loved one, the whole reason you have an Irish wake is they stay with you the last 24 hours are on earth, you know, as their spirit ascends into heaven and leaves them. They're surrounded by their loved ones. In Ireland, it would be very, very strange if you left your loved one in a building by itself in a funeral home overnight. That's very strange to us. And it would be very strange to you if you were there, because the coffin is right there in the living room and it's open. And everybody comes in and drinks all night and eats sandwiches and tells stories over the coffin. You know, you'd say, wow, this is kind of weird. But the reality is, it's therapeutic. That's what an Irish wake is about. As you're staying, it's called a wake because you stay awake. As you're tired and you're frustrated, you end up crying and laughing and telling stories about the person that's in the coffin. Okay. What sometimes happens in our system, I find, is that we don't have a release. And so you have the breakdown a month from when the funeral happened, when there's nobody around to help you through it. So, you know, the funeral is for the living, it's not for the dead. And that's the kind of belief in Ireland. That's the idea. That's why you have a wake, and that's why you have a funeral. If you notice, a lot of, we carry the coffin to the church, and it's mostly males. Females will be in the church, but the procession is usually males. Now that's changing over time, and you will see females at a funeral today. But when I was growing up, that's what a typical funeral was like. Okay, so how do you identify a person as a Catholic or Protestant? What's your name?
Caleb.
Caleb. Is Caleb a Catholic or a Protestant? Okay. What's your name?
Nicole.
Nicole. Is Nicole a Catholic or a Protestant? Can you tell? Unless you've got psychic abilities, probably not. Okay. In Ireland, you would be able to tell. And you would be able to tell because of the name. Let's see if I got a marker here. Okay. This is my brother's name. I have 5 brothers, 4 brothers and 5 sisters. Okay. Oops. So I have Kieran, Brandon, Declan, Fergal, Seamus. And then on my sister's side, I have Breach, Marion, Bernadette, Carmel, those are Gaelic sounding names. In Ireland, in Northern Ireland, you give your daughter or your son a Gaelic sounding name. I just had a son 2.5 years ago, and I named him after one of my brothers, Seamus. Seamus is the Gaelic word for James, by the way. Okay, so a Catholic in Northern Ireland wants to keep that Gaelic heritage alive and the Celtic heritage alive. So you name your saints after Celtic names or saints' names, Irish saints' names. Okay? British or Northern Ireland Protestants give themselves Anglo names. So George, some of you have Anglo names, George, Richard, Mark. My parents would never have called me one of those names. And you can say that's bias, prejudice, whatever. But that's how the cultures were separated. And Catholics went to Catholic schools and Protestants went to Protestant schools. We had 2 separate systems growing up in Northern Ireland. Catholic school, Protestant school. And so all the Catholics, I only met a Protestant every so often. It was usually when I was being chased. So we didn't have much time to communicate. And then I met a lot of Protestants when I come here. But what religion are you? Don't mind me asking.
Well, Protestant guy.
So it wouldn't matter, but we can't tell. But in Northern Ireland you can, because first Catholics marry Catholics. Now they don't. You can get mixed marriage. We call it mixed marriage in the United States. You know, interracial marriage. In Ireland, a mixed marriage is a Catholic married and Protestant. It's silly. But that's cultural differences. Okay, so how do you tell where they live? Well, Catholics live in Catholic neighborhoods. Protestants live in Protestant neighborhoods. The city's divided. This is a typical house in my street. It's 3 bedrooms. Look how many people.
Wow.
So you've got me in here too. So we all sleep in one room. All the males, the brothers. My sisters slept in the other room, and my mother and father were in the third room, producing more errors to the mix. But 3-bedroom house. I mean, very not a lot of money. Working class neighborhood in Belfast. A lot of them look like this. Still do today. Okay, so you can tell Protestant and Catholic neighborhoods because Protestants have an affinity towards the Queen and the emblem of England, which is their flag, which is red, white, and blue. So if you saw this, you could tell right away that you're entering into a Protestant neighborhood. Gangs did it in New York or LA. You know, how do you know that you're going into a gang's neighborhood? Colors and the graffiti. Okay, well, basically you're doing the same thing in the streets in Northern Ireland. Okay, you can tell red-handed Ulster is associated with the Protestant community. Bobby Sands, they talk about in the book. Anytime you see green, white, and gold, or green, you're always in a Catholic community. Again, Catholic community. See how Catholics kind of have an affinity towards the Palestinians? You know, it's about the struggle. You know, that kind of people in the same problem, in the same situation feel like there's a kinship. Protestant neighborhood. Protestant. This is what a typical police vehicle looked like. Very heavily armor plated because they're getting shot at quite a lot and mortared. This is the police station. Typical police station. Heavily fortified because they're getting mortared each night. It's not like your police station. Now, because we have peace today, that's all been removed. And actually a police station looks like a police station. It's kind of nice. Got flowers now, but during the Troubles, that's what a typical police station. I would never go to a police station because you didn't want to be seen walking into a police station if you're a Catholic because they might think that you're a squealer. You know, the police and the army always wearing bulletproof outfits and always carry fully automatic weapons because they're getting attacked out on a daily basis. You know, it's not like England where they walk around with the batons. In Northern Ireland, they had to be prepared for anything. Okay, this is my family. I was the only one that left. The rest of them stayed in Ireland, and they all live, it's my mother, they all live within half a mile from my mother, and they all actually end up being very successful. They're all married and have families now of their own. But I guess I was just strange since I was the only one. And I had the opportunity to come here. They didn't have the opportunity at the time. I just happened to be on a trip. Okay? And that's just what we have now, which is peace. Okay, so go ahead and give me a question if you have one. We were very unique. Maybe it was the fear God put in us by my father and mother. I came from a very strict family, but we were one of the few families that escaped. None of my brothers and sisters were arrested. They might have been detained, which means you're held for a certain amount of time, but it wasn't long, and we were never members of the IRA. So we were probably one of the few big families that escaped without anybody in the immediate family being killed or being put in prison, which is quite amazing. I remember getting into discussion with my father about that. And I said, you know, you should be very proud. You came through all this trouble and you were able to keep the family together and not lose any of them. I think I was pretty proud of that. But, you know, that's what radical extremist groups do. They train each other, and if they can help you out, they help each other out. You know, so I wouldn't be surprised if people went to the Middle East to get training. The IRA did, and that they shared their training because they got very good at building bombs. and homemade mortars and many different ways of waging a terrorist war, an effective terrorist war. Britain spent a lot of money and a lot of manpower trying to control a group that probably only had 800 members, but very well trained 800 members. So I think there was probably relationships, but it might have went the other way around, that they went there for training rather than because they needed the arms themselves, the PLO, I would imagine.
And with Gaelic being spoken, when we were talking about the Viking invasions and whatnot, because they would take prisoners, is Gaelic spoken in Norway, Sweden, Finland, or Iceland?
No, it's the Celtic nations are just Ireland, Scotland, Wales, part of Cornwall, small part of Brittany, and actually if you go to Nova Scotia, Canada, you'll see quite a lot of Gaelic there. I was there a couple of years ago, and you get a lot of Céilís, which are Irish music sessions. You get a lot going on, and you know that's where the Titanic came in. A lot of Irish people kind of came in through Canada that direction. So, but beyond that, in Europe, Gaelic has basically disappeared. You know, think about it logically. If you can't use the language, it's not going to spread very much. I mean, if you can speak German, a lot of Europeans speak German or Spanish or French. You know, that's more marketable. Well, languages that aren't marketable tend to, you know, go by the wayside. Now, there's actually a rejuvenation in Gaelic music and Gaelic culture in the last 25 years, and it's really, really exploding, especially in the schools. You can't teach in Southern Ireland unless you can speak Gaelic. That was a requirement of being a teacher. You know, so it's to keep the tradition alive, the language alive. There's a lot of discrimination, racial discrimination in the United States. Okay, it takes generations to get rid of racial discrimination. Okay, well, we have the same thing. It's very easy to see racial discrimination because you can see somebody's black or white. In Northern Ireland, it's a little bit harder unless you know what you're looking for. Okay, but changing how people think, changing their bias points of view is very, very difficult, and it takes a long time, and it takes community efforts to help it. You have to change the schooling system. There's still Catholic and Protestant school systems, but we have a lot of mixed schools now. You can actually send your child to a mixed school where Protestant Catholics go to it. But, you know, it's hard to do that when, if you're in a Catholic neighborhood and your Catholic school's right there, it's much more convenient to send your child there than to some school at the other side of Belfast where they're going to have to bus over. So, while the realities of peace are that it's working, it takes a long time to heal the wounds of any violence, and it won't happen over one generation. I told my father passed away in 1997. I remember the year before he passed away, I told him, you know, we're going to have peace in 5 years. And my father said, we'll never have peace as long as I live. Ironic that he never got to see it. 2 years later, we had peace. But having peace and being civil to each other is two different things. They have a peace because you're forced into a peace. And everybody wanted peace. They were tired of the violence. But that doesn't change the off-color jokes that both say when they're with their own tribe. And that happens in the States, and it happens everywhere. So it takes time to really, really adjust to, it's not about my religion anymore, it's just, they're just people. So it will take time. And, you know, the murals on the wall, that's a freedom of expression now, and it's hard to get people. Personally, I would like to see nice pictures on the wall. Don't have to be political. But the reality is that a lot of people are still suffering, and that's their way of expressing it. And eventually it'll fade away. It's like the orange marches. The orange men or the Protestants think they have the right to march through a Catholic neighborhood because that's what they did for the last 100 years. Well, the Catholics aren't standing for that today. kind of imagine the Klan going through Harlem. They might have the right to do it, express their freedom, and it wouldn't be a very good thing to do for many reasons. You know, so that's what you're starting to see today, is those kind of differences. Anything else?
Is religion taught in schools, like elementary schools, kind of like Catholic schools are here?
That's the strange thing. We had two school systems. We had a Catholic school system and a state. In the Catholic school system, you're taught about Catholicism. You know, we have Mass every day, just like you were going to a Catholic parochial school here in Houston. In the state school system, there is no religion. Now, you might have a cultural class where you might discuss different religions, but there was no Protestant religion taught in the schools. But again, you know, remember, when I'm speaking from a biased point of view. I'm speaking because I was a Catholic. You know, you always have to keep that in mind. You know, one of the hardest things about being a professor is trying not to be biased. You try to stay true to the facts, but it's hard to remove that from something that you grew up in the middle of. When you saw things like this happening, the Catholics were just as bad as the Protestants with the atrocities that they committed. Both sides committed horrendous atrocities, and it takes a long time to get over the pain and suffering of that. Any questions about the book or the author?
I just have a question. Like, what do you, in your opinion, what would you say are like the biggest failings of the international community, what you would call the international community now, I guess, when it comes to things like basic civil rights, like habeas corpus, things like that were just totally suspended during all this? Where was the outcry, or why wasn't there an outcry from the global community?
There's no outcry because it doesn't affect you. And we've become generally, not just in our society, but most societies, it's all about me. And if it's not impacting me and not affecting me directly, I don't really want to do too much about it and invest too much time. I told you Bill Clinton got involved. He's the only president that ever did. That was a costly proposition, because it could have fell apart and he could have looked bad about it. One of the reasons he did it, it wasn't just because he did it, because he had made a promise. You know, you make all these promises when you're getting ready to become the president. He promised the Irish community that he would get involved and try and get a peace process. Maybe he didn't know that anything was going to come out of it, but he actually, at the end of it, he gets a lot of credit. So a lot of times nothing happens because we don't think that it impacts us. I mean, we have a lot of problems like that in the United States. We have a prison population of 2.4 million, but we don't think it impacts us directly because I don't have anybody in prison. But it is impacting you because you're paying for that 2.4 million. You know, so until it really starts weighing down on you, which it is now because prisons are costing us a fortune, once it starts impacting you, you tend to do something. But a lot of people talk about humanitarian rights. Very few people do something about it. I mean, we try to do things now and again, but in Mogadishu, with what happened there, that was a cool reminder. Sometimes it can be very costly to get involved in somebody else's wars, political wars. So the world talks a lot, but it doesn't act a lot when it comes to humanitarian situations.
In your mind, when I was in Iraq, we were trying to win the hearts and minds, and we got to know the chiefs, the people themselves. Do you think that if the English or the British Army had taken a stance like that and gotten together with all the Irish districts, gotten to know the priests, the leaders, who have you, do you think that would have had a better impact on British occupation in Northern Ireland?
Oh, that's one of the major failings. And there's a really good, I remember reading an article about that once, where one of the majors in the British Army said that. He says that we lost the hearts and minds war, and once we lost that, then it was over. Bernadette Devlin, very prominent Catholic that, you know, she's rose to prominence during the Troubles. She said that, you know, when the British Army first came, you're giving them cakes and you're bringing them tea. Because when they first came, the Catholics thought they were coming to do what?
They're going to liberate them.
Yeah, they're going to stop the Protestants from burning, because a lot of the Protestants were burning out Catholic neighborhoods in the start of the Troubles. So when the British Army moved in, it was, the Catholics are thinking, oh, they're here to protect us. And I remember Bernadette Devlin, who was a member of Parliament. She was later shot, but she survived, but very prolific. She said, you know, you're giving them cakes and tea today. Next week you're going to be shooting at them. And that's what they did. And the IRA didn't want people talking to the British soldiers. And so when the IRA started taking out British soldiers, who do they take it out on? The community that's supporting them, which is the Catholic community. You see echoes of that in Iraq. You know, our forces went to Iraq to help the people, and you try to build that bond, and then there's a mortar goes off and your comrades are injured, and then somebody goes out and does something crazy to the village, and then that just pushes the village and the people against the army. And once that starts happening, which is happening in Afghanistan or whatever, once that starts happening, then you can't turn the tide. I think similar situations are happening in Afghanistan. We've lost the hearts and mind war, and once you start losing that war, that's telling you that you should think about your exit strategy much more. And I think that's a really major failing of the British and the British Army. You need intel about the community, you need to know how to reach the community, and you need to help them. It got to the point where everybody in my neighborhood hated the British soldiers. I did too. I mean, you were supposed to. And you saw them as a threat because they're the ones kicking in your door. And they're not kicking in Protestant doors because they're not getting shot by Protestants. They're getting shot by Catholic IRA. You know, so the places that were fortified the most were the the Catholic neighborhoods. And we're the ones that were getting stopped the most. And so that's why there was kind of resentment. But you're right, they should have won the hearts and minds in the beginning. Could have changed everything. It was a good training ground for the military. I mean, tactical training ground that you could train people for terrorism. And, you know, bomb making, how do you defuse bombs. Britain learned a lot out of it. Now, it was an expensive training ground, but a military point of view, it probably wasn't very expensive. I mean, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were like this. You know, so if she wanted Tim to say anything, he would say it, and vice versa. The last thing about that, you mentioned about, you know, people changing. I think it's just the IRA and the Protestants came, they finally tired out. I think that's why peace, it was partly due to the American government getting involved in the British and Irish government. But the reason peace came is very kind of strange. It's somewhat linked to 9/11, in my opinion. After 9/11, any terrorist group was not tolerated. You know, prior to 9/11, you could raise money for the IRA in Boston, Chicago. After 9/11, you were a terrorist like everybody else talking about the IRA. So that probably hastened a lot of groups to say, you know what, it's going to get much more difficult to raise money and to raise weapons or whatever. It's a good time to look at the future about ending the political struggle. You know, so I think in a strange kind of way, it kind of helped the situation, hastened the peace process, because it started in '99, but it was ongoing for a few years after. You know, you still get squatting. How will you get it in America? You can go on vacation, come back, and somebody's in your house. And you have to go through the legal ramifications. Of course, in Texas, you just get the gun out, wouldn't you? But in castle law. But no, squatting used to be much more of a larger problem in Ireland because, you know, if the authorities came out, they were warned not to come to your area by the IRA or by the Protestant paramilitaries. So there was a huge black market in Northern Ireland because nobody was claiming that they were working. So it's called being on the dole. The book talks about it. Okay, the dole means unemployment benefits. So everybody's claiming that they're not working, but everybody has a job in a bar or a restaurant and they're getting paid cash. So there was this huge black market, and so both the IRA and the Protestant paramilitaries, they got into the game too. So they ran clubs. You used to call them speakeasies during the Great Depression. So you'd have an IRA club called it. There was actually two wings of the IRA: the provisional wing and the stickies. And so what has happened is they created their own bars in their neighborhoods, and they would sell the beer at a very big discount because the money's going to the organization. And the Protestants did the same thing, and then they took over the taxis. You can actually get a black taxi tour, and it takes you up the Shankill or the Falls or whatever. Well, those taxis were owned by the IRA. They were subsidized by the IRA and by the Protestants. You know, so it was all this black market. And so, you know, in Britain, you have to have a license to watch television. It's very kind of silly. You have to buy this license that allows you to watch television, okay? And if you don't have a license, you get a fine, okay? So when anybody came to check your house for a license, they wouldn't come to Catholic areas because they were warned, if you come in here, we're going to get killed. You know, so nobody had a license. So the black market during the Troubles was horrendous. And now all that money's feeding back into the system again, because now you're getting rewards for turning in your neighbor. You know, so peace dividend means that, you know, you're telling that your friend down the street, or who no longer your friend, is getting in the dole and working at the same time. So it's becoming very legal. People are actually abiding by the laws now, which during the Troubles, funny, you know, during the Troubles were very bad, and crime, the political crime was very bad, you know, possibility of getting shit at, but you weren't getting robbed. Because if you were getting robbed, you went down the street, told the IRA, and they kneecapped the guy. You know, end of criminal problem. But now, you know, we have regular crime now. You know, the regular house breaking in, somebody stealing your car. You know, before we didn't have those problems, but now we have those problems.
In the book, we were learning about joyriding and all of that. Did you ever go on one of those?
No, I was just a little bit. Joyriding only became popular in the late 1980s, 1990s. Before, you didn't do that because the IRA would just basically take you out, shoot off your kneecaps, and that was the end of the story. What happened, the reason why you get a lot of joyriding is because the IRA started easing up on, you know, clamping down on things. And the UDA, see, the way, they had very interesting ways of punishing people in Northern Ireland. The UDA would get a drill and they'd put it in the back of your kneecap and it would drill through. You know, so that's why you saw a lot of people walking around with limps. The IRA would put a gun there and blow your kneecap off. Okay? And you were like a walking sign. It's kind of like in the Middle East where they used to cut off the hands of thieves. When you see people walking with no hand, you kind of, oh, I don't think I want to steal anything. Same kind of philosophy in Ireland was, it's not right, but it was punishment by the IRA or punishment by the Protestant paramilitaries. And at a time it was very effective, but as time progressed and in the 1990s and the 2000s, kids would do that all the time because the police weren't going to chase them. Go into a Catholic area? No. Let him tear up his own area, you know. So that was part of the problem. Now today, that situation's got a lot better. The police are probably 90% Protestant or 80%, I'm not quite sure the numbers, but it's probably about 80% Protestant, might even be 75, and the remainder would be Catholic. Whereas during the Troubles, it was all Protestant, maybe 1% Catholic. And if you were a Catholic in the police, you didn't live in a Catholic area, because the IRA would have tried to kill you. You know, so if you took a job like that, you might as well kiss your relations goodbye because you're not going to see them again.
So growing up there, what was your opinion of the United States, and did it change when you got here?
No, like I said, I believed in the American dream, and so, well, the streets aren't paved with gold. That is a slight problem.
Depends on where you go, there might be a cave or something.
So I think I thought that you could come here and you could do anything, and to me that kind of came true. You can do anything you want here as long as you are willing to work hard for it. Anybody in this classroom can become what they want to if they're willing to do the effort that it takes. It may be an extraordinary amount of effort, but you can become anything you want. And so I find that that was extremely true for my experience. But remember, I was coming from a very hostile environment to an environment that, you know, was a lot of fun. I mean, high school was fun. I went to high school here, and, you know, so I wasn't getting chased anymore, had an accent, you know, so it was fun, and I enjoyed it, and I think it was a unique experience. Now, just to kind of wrap up, there's a price to be paid for that, and you learn that more in life. I attained a lot of great experiences and educational advances, but as you get older, you start realizing how important your family are. And so, even though I've been gone, 25 years now, 28 years, I still miss them a lot, and I still miss the culture. The culture, I'm pretty much assimilated into the culture, the American culture now, but I still miss the culture that I grew up with. And just like a simple thing, going to a bar. You're kind of out of place going to a bar when you're close to 50 like me. You know, what's that old fella doing here? Because bars are where 18 and 21-year-olds go or whatever. In Ireland, a bar might have a 16-year-old and a 90-year-old, and they're having a conversation. We kind of, so cultural things like that, I miss. You know, it's not really about the drinking, it's just the social aspect. You know, you would stop by a pub on the way home from work and you'd have a beer. If you did that here, we saying he's got a drinking problem. You know, he stops by that pub every day. But it's actually to catch up. You're not getting drunk every day. It's to catch up on what's going on in the neighborhood. But, you know, so those cultural things I still find different. But they don't have any crawfish boils over there, and I would miss that. You know, so when you grow up here, or the part about being an immigrant is when you're here, you miss Ireland, and when I'm in Ireland, I miss here. And any immigrant will tell you that. Yeah, that's what happens when you're an immigrant. Okay, I think that's it. All right, thank you for letting me come and talk to you today.